If you knew me as a child, you would have known me as a lover, though most people called me boy crazy. While most kids were focused on building sandcastles and playing Go Fish, I was off chasing boys on the playground, watching Hilary Duff and Amanda Bynes fall in love in some of my favorite movies, screaming country love songs at the top of my lungs, and writing secret love notes to my celebrity crushes. I was, and probably always will be, a hopeless romantic. I love love, and I love a good love story. Sometimes I wonder why in every form of media, these are the stories that stick out to me. Why love? But then I remember that my entire existence is rooted in the greatest love story of all time, and then it makes a bit more sense. Over time, I've struggled to find love stories that resonate with me. Year after year, more and more authors are releasing books with darker content, intimate bedroom scenes, and things that don't fit in the heart-shaped box of the love that I've come to know. Every love story is different, and there's beauty in that. There are also love stories that don't get to the heart of love at all. Love is about much more than looks and lust. It's about more than a one-night stand or a booty call. Love is a choice, a beautiful choice to bear one's soul to another, to hope and to trust, to accept each other's flaws, to offer undying support, to be selfless and kind. Love is all these things and more. While love can be messy, true love is good and pure. And that's what I look for in my romance books. Of course, sometimes these stories may seem unrealistic, but doesn't it all fiction? I'm not looking for perfection, but I am looking for more of a representation of the love that I know, the kind that comes from love himself. In this venture, I found a love of romantic comedies with no cursing and just kissing. I've realized I really enjoy when a biblical fiction author can write such a beautiful depiction of godly men. Not all the romances I read are like this. Some do inevitably feature a little more intimacy, innuendo, and closed-door or off-page scenes. And I'm okay with that, because at times, it's still more respectful and better to me than some alternatives. I believe there are still enchanting love stories out there, hidden in the crevices of our bookstores and libraries, just waiting for readers like me, and maybe readers like you, to find them. So, if anything I've said resonates with you, if you're looking for some really great, clean, and closed-door romances, I invite you, my fellow hopeless romantic, to today's video. Hello everyone, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Keisha and I'm so excited to talk to you all about some of my romance book recommendations today. Some of these books are ones that I have read and really loved, and others are just on my physical TBR, and I'm also really excited about those. So to make this a little bit easier for you all, I have broken this video up into 3 different sections. We're going to have a clean romance section, which is going to be, by my definition, just kissing. And then we will have a closed door romance section, which is going to be implying that something is going on behind a closed door, but you are not going to get any explicit or open door scenes. And then the third category is going to be Christian romance, which is going to be free of language and spice, and it's also going to incorporate some faith content. As I previously mentioned in my intro, I have found some romance books that really encompass my heart and soul and are the perfect definition of love for me. And so I hope that you all can find some good recommendations in this video. But I did want to go ahead and mention a couple of creators that I follow that I also get great recommendations from, just in case you're looking for some more. So the 2 that right off the top of my head come to mind are, 1, Caroline Williams. She's active here on YouTube and has some really great clean and closed door recommendations, and we read a lot of similar books, so definitely check her out. And then I also want to mention actually 2 different creators on Instagram, Hannah K Reads and Samantha K Reads. I will link them down in the description box below. They also offer up a lot of clean and closed door recommendations as well, and all 3 of these ladies also sometimes recommend Christian books, so just be aware of them if you aren't already. Okay, let's get this show on the road. We're going to start off with the clean romance section, and I would be remiss to start off with anybody but my favorite author. And you all, if you have been here on my channel long enough, you probably already know who this is. That is my girl, Courtney Walsh. So like I mentioned, Courtney writes clean romances. She writes great witty banter and great rom-coms, but she also has a lot of heart in her books. She oftentimes weaves themes of grace, forgiveness, and second chances throughout, and that is one thing I absolutely love about her. She also has no swearing and, like I said, no spice, and a happily ever after every single time. You won't find a lot of super heavy content in her books, but what you will find are some really captivating moments and still some really hard-hitting messages, just not with so much heaviness. This book in particular is my favorite by her, and it is the first in the Holidays with Heart hockey romance series. And this one follows our main character, Poppy Hart. She is a small town chef and baker that owns her own business, but she is struggling a little bit with her business right now. And one day she is in a coffee shop waiting in line to get her cup of joe when she ends up running into her high school nemesis, Mean Girl. They're having a little bit of a spat, and she ends up bumping into none other than hockey's hottest bad boy, Dallas Burke. He kind of swoops in and saves the day and pretends to be her fake boyfriend. But the charade does not end there, because when Dallas's manager and his sweet little meddling grandma catches wind of this, they decide that it would be a good idea for both of them to continue fake dating. On the one hand, it would be really helpful for Dallas's bad boy image to be dating a sweet girl next door type. It'll soften him a little bit. And then on the other hand, for Poppy to be dating a celebrity, that would probably help her business. So that is the premise of the story. It is my favorite romance of all time right now. I love it so much. But when I say it's my favorite romance, I will say it's my favorite rom-com. She writes rom-coms so well. So if you want to laugh, if you want to maybe even get a little teary-eyed, I highly recommend checking out this series. And it does follow 3 different sisters. And I do have the second book, which is My Lucky Charm, and this follows Poppy's sister Eloise. She's actually the character so far of Courtney Walsh's characters that I relate with the most, so I absolutely adore her. And she ends up going through a breakup, and on New Year's Eve, she sees her ex and immediately is like, oh no, I can't let him know that I can see him or that I care about this. So she ends up having a New Year's Eve kiss with a stranger. And later on, Eloise ends up being hired by the Chicago Comets hockey team, which is the hockey team we're following in this series as well. And they need her to kind of soften this grumpy guy that just got brought down to the Chicago Comets from the NHL. He is not really warming up to Chicago or the team very well, so it's her job to be his personal assistant and help him acclimate a little bit. However, guess who the guy is? If you guess that it's the guy, the stranger that she kissed on New Year's Eve, you would be correct. And the cutest romance comes out of it. These books are going to have a third book with the third sister coming out hopefully later this year, so keep your eyes peeled if these sound good to you. Next, I'll talk about Courtney's Cross Country series. So the first book that I ever read by her was A Cross Country Christmas, and then the sequel to that one is A Cross Country Wedding. Now, these are just companion novels, as well as the first series I talked about. Those are as well, but I always recommend reading them in order so you kind of get the meat of all the characters that you see in the stories. But this one is following our main character, Lauren, and she needs a ride home for Christmas because she's too scared to fly on a plane, and she doesn't really have a way to get home. But her brother ends up setting her up with a ride share with none other than her brother's best friend, Will Sinclair, but it's also her childhood crush. So she's kind of been trying to avoid him for all these years, and now she's going to have to go on this cross-country road trip to go home for Christmas with him, and it is the sweetest story. There are some rom-com-y elements in this one, but I do think this is more of a sweet romance Christmas story, so I highly recommend checking this one out. And if you like this one, check out A Cross Country Wedding, which is following Maddie and Simon. And Maddie and Simon have been friends for forever. They met in college, and they are a little bit of polar opposites. Maddie is really spontaneous, and Simon is more of like the serious type. And Maddie has had this string of boyfriends for a while now, and what she doesn't know is that Simon has been pining after her for all these years, and now there's opportunity for maybe that to come to light when they both are going to go on a cross-country road trip to their best friends' weddings. I wonder who those best friends could be. So we have the best friend's brother / childhood crush trope, and we have a friends to lovers trope. If either of those pique your interest, I highly recommend checking these out. And lastly, with Courtney Walsh, I'll just graze over these last two that I have. They're both Christmas books. I know it's not Christmas season, but if these are not on your radar for this Christmas, maybe this can put them there. This one is Merry Xmas, and it is a second chance romance, and this one is Christmas with a Crank, which is also a second chance romance. So if that is your trope, these books might just be for you. This one follows our main character, Marin, and Marin is trying to convince her producer to make her the permanent host of Good Day Denver. So she is going to take him home to her small town that she hasn't been home to in 8 years. And she's going to try to convince him with this series of stories that she's going to do over all the different Christmas traditions in her small town. But when she comes back home, she finds out that her family has been entertaining her ex-boyfriend, Max, for all these years. So second chance romance here. And then this one is following our main character, Olive and Liam. And Liam's family owns this Christmas tree farm, and Olive and Liam are coming together after all these years of being apart. And they had crushes on each other as a kid, but it never really panned out. And now they're getting a second chance at love while they're trying to save his parents' Christmas tree farm. Okay, now that we've got my favorite author out of the way, let's go on with some other clean romances that I have discovered over the last year or two, and I am excited to share with you. So the next one is going to be a little bit confusing because they're two companion series, and I'm talking about them both at the same time because they do overlap. So I will just mention the first book in this series, and then I'll go on from there. So this book is called Just Don't Fall by Emma St. Clair. And this is both the first book in the Sweater Weather series, which is a companion series that all takes place in Harvest Hollow, and they're written by 7 different authors, and they're 7 different books. And then there's also a series called the Appies Hockey Romance series. Those are, I think there's 6 different books out right now, and those alternate between Emma St. Clair and Jenny Proctor. So these overlap a little bit. So I have the first 2. I have Just Don't Fall and Absolutely Not in Love, which is the first book and the second book in the Appies Hockey Romance series, but then this is the first book, and then this is the 7th book in the Sweater Weather series. So I know it's confusing, but I have a stack here of all these books. The Sweater Weather series takes place all in the fall. You can see those by the little leaves on the side. And then the Appies Hockey Romance series has the Appies logo. I love both of these series so much. They are really great reads. They are clean. They might have like a little bit of like pining and a little bit of like, I don't want to say promiscuity because that's not what it is. It's not in any way, form, shape, or fashion like spicy in my opinion, but you are dealing with real human people. So just keep that in mind. So I do really love these. I think this is a great clean option if any of the things I said pique your interest. There's a bunch of different tropes throughout all of these. There's friends to lovers. There's the neighbor trope. There is a trope that's about marriage of convenience. There are so many different things. There's Grumpy Sunshine, so definitely check out this series. And now I'm going to talk about an author that most of you all probably know because she is pretty popular. I have a little bit of mixed feelings towards her, and I will tell you why. So the author that I want to talk to you about is Sarah Adams. So my first book that I ever read by Sarah Adams was The Off Limits Rule, and this, I believe, was her first book ever. If not, it's one of the first ones she ever came out with. And this is the indie edition. I know these have been traditionally published since then, but I have not read that edition. But you can tell that I did tab up this edition. I loved this book so much. This particular book is following Lucy and Cooper. Lucy is a hairdresser and single mom, and Cooper is Lucy's brother's best friend. So that's the trope you have there. This was an adorable book, and I loved Lucy. She's a really quirky and fun character that I found to be very relatable. And I loved this book. And then from there, things kind of went downhill for me. I didn't like the sequel to this book as much. And then I also didn't really jive with the cheat sheet. But I will say that those books are clean romances. But Sarah Adams does have some language in her books. Then I read When in Rome, which I did give this one a 3.5 star, and I can recommend it to you, but it's just not one of my favorites. This one follows a pop star named Amelia Rose, or as she is better known, Ray Rose. She breaks down in Rome, Kentucky in front of this guy's house. His name is Noah Walker. He's a chef or a baker, and they have a romance that blooms from there. To me, this gave me the Hannah Montana movie vibes, except that he knows that she's famous, like he knows who she is, and in the Hannah Montana movie, that guy had no clue. Now, these books, like I said, are clean, but I will say that Sarah Adams has kind of branched out a little bit, if you want to call it that, and started incorporating some spicier scenes in her books. I know that the rule book is spicier, and I think the 3rd book in this When in Rome series ended up being spicier. And so just be aware of that. Maybe some of her backlist would be for you, but just know that she does start to incorporate some more spice and some more suggestive language in her books as they get newer. Next up, I want to talk about a book that I haven't read yet, and that is The Golden Goal by Annah Conwell. This is the first book in the More Than a Game series. Now, at first glance, you're probably thinking, okay, another hockey romance series. And this is a hockey romance following the Alabama Rockets, but the other books in this series are following different sports. So I think we have a golf romance, a football romance, and different things like that. I'm not sure how many books are out in the series yet, but I'm really excited to try this one out. So this is a clean romance, but I do think that there are some content warnings at the beginning, just in case you want to know what those are. I will go ahead and list off a couple here just in case you're wondering. It does say that there are some steamier makeout scenes in this one, and this book does mention alcoholism and drug addiction, but it is not the focus of the book. And also, since hockey is played in this one, there are some mentions of blood, injuries, and gang-related violence. I will say in Courtney Walsh's, there is not really that I remember, so just be aware of that going into this one. But I'm really excited to read this. This follows Shaw and Sutton is becoming Shaw's physical therapist for the hockey team, and they have a romance that ensues from there. I do think that Shaw is Sutton's brother's best friend, so in case you can't tell, I also really love that trope, and there's a little bit of rivals to lovers in this as well. Next up, we have Falling Slow by Sydney Muse. This is the first book in the Ponderosa Falls Wilderness Resort romance series, and I'm very excited for this one. I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about this, and I've been itching to get to it for a while, but for some reason, I keep putting it off. This follows Naomi and Clint is trying to save his brother's ranch. He ends up going to Naomi's father's wilderness resort to try to strike up a business deal with him, but instead he ends up making a bet with him that involves teaching Naomi how to ride a horse, and again, a romance ensues from there. I do think this one has a little bit heavier of topics. I think there's a little bit more emotion and drama in this one, and I know that it does deal with some grief and toxic relationships, so be mindful of that. But it is a small town cowboy romance, and I'm really excited to try this out. I don't know if it'll be my first cowboy romance because I do have others that I want to get to, but I need to try some cowboy romance. Then I have a fall book, so put this on your radar for fall if you don't want to read it right now, but that is Pumpkin Everything by Beth Labonte. I read this last fall, and it was a really sweet Hallmarky story, which is great because it also has a Hallmark movie adaptation. I will say that they are not really the same. They are very different, and I did prefer the book, but in their own right, they are both great. So this follows Amy, and years ago, Amy left her heart in Autumnboro, New Hampshire. When she left, she was breaking up with this guy named Kit that she fell in love with, and she has not turned back since. She became a horror novelist. She was engaged to be married, but then she found out her fiance was cheating on her. So she has a little bit of a string of bad luck that happens because her grandfather also runs through a Dunkin' Donuts. And no, I don't mean that he ran through the drive-thru. I mean, he ran through the building. So she has to go back home to Autumnboro to take care of him and help him take care of his shop called Pumpkin Everything. And when she returns, she discovers that she may have left more of her heart in Autumnboro than she initially realized. Another clean romance that I'm really excited to get to, hopefully this summer, is Girl Meets Grump by Hailey Gardiner. This is the first book in the Kitts Harbor series, and the second book, I believe, is a baseball romance. Now, I will say that we are not going to get any more books from this author because sadly she did pass away earlier this month. So I would encourage you, if I say anything about this book that interests you and you want to support her family, I do believe they're still selling these books to kind of support funds for her and her family. She did leave behind a husband and kids, and so this is just an absolute tragedy that happened. It was kind of an out of the nowhere thing. So if you want to support the family, please, please, please consider checking these books out. But this book is following Trent and Sydney, and Trent is the owner and contractor of Wildwood. Sydney is a travel blogger, and she just returned home and got a job at Wildwood. This is a little bit of a grumpy sunshine, obviously, Girl Meets Grump, a grumpy sunshine romance, and it is set in an outdoor cabin resort in the Pacific Northwest, and it's a little bit of opposites attract. So this sounds really adorable, and I can't wait to get to it. Then we have Change of Plans by Cindy Rass. I have seen nobody talk about this, but tell me why nobody hasn't. Tell me why this cover is not on everybody's Instagram feed. I need to know why. This is gorgeous. So this is following Emberly and Colton, and Emberly is leaving her old life behind and her old relationships behind. She's had a bit of a rough go, and so she is determined to start fresh somewhere new. She starts a new job, and she ends up meeting Colton, her new boss, and this is going to be a workplace romance. This also is a little bit of a reverse grumpy sunshine, And he is a cinnamon roll or golden retriever character, or whatever you want to call him, where he falls first. And I love that trope. I've also heard that this has really strong female friendships in this one, which I can always get behind. And it has pop culture references, which, as long as they're pop culture from like my time, which are like the 1990s, early 2000s, which I think most of these books are that have pop culture references. So I'm very excited and intrigued by this one. Next is The Best Friends Playlist by Jessica King. This is another cute cover. I mean, honestly, all these covers are adorable. Aren't all romance covers, but this one is about Paige and Jordan, and Jordan friend-zoned Paige all these years ago. So they've been friends for forever, and she's always kind of had a thing for him, but he's put her in the friend zone. Now they're adults, and I think Jordan might be softening to her a little bit. So this is a friends to lovers romance, and it also has song references throughout. The Best Friends Playlist, I mean, of course it would. And I also know that there is no language in this, which I'm pretty sure in all the books I've mentioned so far, except for Sarah Adams, I don't think there's language. And if there is, it's very, very minimal. So just know that. And then also I want to give a trigger warning for this one. This does deal with grief and cancer. I'm not sure how heavily, but I just know that is mentioned. I think she does put like a content warning at the front about that. So just be aware if that is a trigger for you, that it is talked about in this book. Another book that is going to have that same trigger for cancer and grief, and I do know this one particularly, is I think a parent passing away from cancer. That is going to be Once Upon a Boyband by Jenny Proctor. But don't be deterred by that, unless it's a trigger, obviously. But don't be deterred, because this sounds like the cutest story. So this is set in small town North Carolina, and it also is a crossover from her Hawthorne Brothers series. So I haven't read that one, but I would still like to really read this one. You don't have to read the other before reading this, but I think some of those characters may pop up in this one. This story follows Lainey, and she is a veterinarian, and it follows Adam, who used to be in Lainey's favorite boy band, Midnight Rush. And now, so back then his name was Deke, now his name is Adam, and he looks a little bit different. So when he brings his rescue dogs into her vet office, she does not recognize him, but they're going to have a romance. And I love that trope. Like, what a childhood dream to grow up and end up dating the guy that you had a crush on in the boy band that you grew up with. I mean, come on. And the last author for this section is also going to be one that, number one, I think you will recognize, and number two, may overlap some in the closed door category, so this is a good segue. So the author that I want to talk to you about is Catherine Center. I have not yet read a Catherine Center book, but I own two, and I think they're two pretty different ones. What You Wish For is one of her more backlisted books that I think takes on a more serious tone, and then The Bodyguard is one of her more recent releases, and it is more of a rom-com. So what I do know is that Catherine Center does have some language in her books, but I don't think there is a ton. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but there is some language. But as far as I know, these two books are clean. There may be some innuendo, like just maybe suggestive comments. Since there's language, I have no idea. You guys can tell me in the comments, like I said. But as far as I know, they're clean. I will say that some of her newer books, I think, may be more closed door, but either way, they should still be a safer bet for you if you're trying to avoid some spice. So first, let's talk about What You Wish For. This is set in Texas in an elementary school, and it follows our main character, Samantha, who is a school librarian, and then Duncan, who is an old colleague of Samantha's, and he's also the new principal at her school. They both kind of have some traumatic pasts and some things that they deal with. I do think that this might have a school shooting in it, or at least recounting of that, so be aware of that if that is a trigger for you. I'm not 100% sure if that's in this book, but I feel like I remember somebody saying that it was. But if you're in this for a good second chance romance with kisses only, I think this might be a good one to check out. And then I have The Bodyguard, which I'll probably end up reading this one first, because I think with this adorable cover, I'm going to read it during the spring. And this follows Hannah, and Hannah ends up becoming the bodyguard for this movie star named Jack Stapleton. And the reason why is because he has this stalker. I think this concept is really funny because you don't really think of a woman oftentimes being a bodyguard, especially not for a man. And anyways, he ends up having to go back home to Texas because his mom gets sick, but he doesn't want to bring his female bodyguard home with him because that embarrasses him. So he's going to end up making his family think that they are fake dating instead. All right, let's move into the closed door section of this video. So the closed door romances, again, are typically implying that something is going on behind a door, but there's no explicit or open door scenes. Now, you would think because I just read this book, I would be able to tell you 100% for sure about these things, but I can't quite remember. So this is in the closed door category, but it actually may even be clean. So just keep that in mind. But this is Before I Do by Sophie Cousins. This was my first Sophie Cousins book, and I read it at the end of last year, and I really ended up enjoying it. There is some language in this one, so just be aware, but Sophie Cousins, I feel like, will be a pretty safe author for me. So this concept is basically, what would you do if the one who got away showed up the night before your wedding? This follows our main character, Audrey, and she is set to marry her one true love, Josh. So Audrey and Josh are a little bit of polar opposites, but they fell in love. But the night before their wedding, Josh's sister brings in a date to the rehearsal dinner, and it just so happens to be Fred, who is the one that got away, that Audrey had one special day with all these years ago. I think it was 6 years ago. And she's always wondered what if. So she's wondering if fate brought him back into her life for a reason. This deals with some really good topics. And honestly, at the end of this, I was tearing up at some relatability in this. And I think this is just a really good story about those topics. I'm not going to tell you which way it goes because honestly, the whole way through, I had no idea which guy she was going to choose. But this is well worth the read. And I only have one more author for this category, but she is one that I absolutely love, and I'm so excited to talk to you all about her because she is probably my second favorite romance author of all time. So that is going to be Carrie Winfrey. So let's just go ahead and start with the first book that I ever read by her, and that is Just Another Love Song. I adore this book with my whole heart. If I was thinking about a Hallmarky romanticized version of where I grew up, this book is that. Like, it felt like home to me, and it was so sweet. This story follows Hank and Sandy, and Hank and Sandy fell in love when they were kids, but life had other plans. Hank ended up being able to pursue his dreams of becoming an alternative country singer, but Sandy's aspirations to become an artist fell through and left her stuck in their hometown of Baileyville, Ohio. Now it's 15 years later, and Hank is back in town with a son in tow. So you have the single dad trope, and it's going to be a second chance romance because Sandy is still head over heels for Hank. This is such a cute small town romance story. I highly recommend checking it out. Again, if you like the single dad trope or second chance romances between high school sweethearts. Also, this has some really great friendships in it, as well as some quirky characters. There's county fairs, and there are early 2000s classic country song references, which I absolutely loved. Next up, I have Faking Christmas, which I highly recommend checking out this Christmas. Of all the Christmas books, other than the Courtney Walsh ones, which if I had to say, like, definitely pick up Christmas books, I would say this one, Across Country Christmas, and then Faking Christmas. Hands down, these two need to be top priority if you have not read them. So this is about Laurel. Laurel is a social media manager for Buckeye State of Mind, which is an Ohio tourism magazine and website. Now, Laurel's boss, Gilbert, is looking at this farm on social media with her one day, and he mistakes this farm for being Laurel's when it's actually her twin sister Holly's farm. So he's thinking she has this farm and this family and all these nice things, and there's not really an opportunity for Laurel to correct that. So Gilbert's wife ends up dumping him, and he kind of invites himself over for their family's annual Christmas Eve dinner. And Laurel can't really turn him down, so her and her sister end up coming up with this plan to pretend that all of this stuff is Laurel's, that the farm is Laurel's, that the kids are Laurel's, but Holly doesn't really want her husband to be Laurel's. So when Laurel gets back home for this one dinner to showcase the farm to Gilbert, Max is there, and Max is her nemesis ever since her sister's wedding, and you get to find out why along the way. But this is a fun fake dating story with lots of laugh out loud moments, and it's based on the movie Christmas in Connecticut. So if you like that, or it's inspired by that. So if you like that movie, maybe check this one out. It is enemies to lovers, and there's a lot of shenanigans. This is just a really fun comedic Hallmark movie. So if you're looking for a good short Christmas read this year, definitely check out Faking Christmas. And this one is my favorite. I absolutely loved it. It was my second favorite book of last year. My Phony Valentine was my first, but honestly, these books rival so closely. Yeah, you just need to know that, because Very Sincerely Yours is something you absolutely need to add to your TBR. This book is like You've Got Mail meets Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I know that sounds so weird, and there are some weird elements in this book. It is a very quirky book, but I need you to trust me. I need you to keep reading, and I need you to absolutely fall in love with this. The story follows our main character, Teddy, and she is approaching 30 years old. She works at a vintage toy store, and she's honestly wondering what in the world she's doing with her life. And then we follow Everett St. James, who is the local children's TV show host, fully equipped with puppets and charm. So he's basically Mr. Rogers. Now, what you may not know is that Teddy absolutely loves watching Everett's show. It's her comfort show. It's her guilty pleasure. And Everett gets these letters in from children asking for advice on his show every week. And one night, Teddy's just kind of going through it, and she ends up emailing a letter to Everett, and they end up starting an email correspondence from there. That is the sweetest thing ever. This book has so many layers, so many good things. It is a quirky love story, but it also has the best friendship and found family. It's about finding your passions and being yourself. It has lots of 80s and 90s pop culture references. There's karaoke, there's a Halloween party. It does take place in the fall. You might not know that by this cover, and it does have some fall elements, but I think you can read this any time of year. But if you need a time of year, if you're a seasonal reader, check it out in the fall. It also has some cute PJ movie nights, hilarious family dinners, and the sweetest and smartest little 12-year-old girl you ever did meet. I just love everything about this book. So I hope I convinced you to pick this one up. Now we're finally at our last category, which is going to be the Christian romance category, which again is no spice, no language, and some faith content. Now, some of these books are going to be extreme, well, not extreme, but like they're going to be heavier on the faith content. And then some of these may just have very subtle faith content. Some of these I definitely think you could read even if you are not a person of faith, and you could still get a lot out of it. So I hope that you will still consider checking these out either way. But I do want to start with some biblical romance or biblical fiction. The reason why is because this author does biblical romance so well. They are biblical fiction books. They are based on stories or people from the Bible, but the romance is honestly a huge part of it for me. So the author that I want to talk to you all about is Tessa Afshar. She is my favorite biblical fiction author. She is the author that turned me on to this genre. She is such a captivating writer. She really brings Bible stories to life. I do believe that there isn't really like a need for any adding to scripture or anything like that, and that is not what she's doing. She is honestly, I think, trying to make things a little bit more accessible for us as readers, but also giving you a fictional story that's based in truth too, and I love that. She does such a good job with her research. She does such a good job with just giving you more personality behind these people that we meet, and I love that so much. So this one, called In the Field of Grace, is based on the book of Ruth in the Bible, and it follows Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. And I won't go into detail about that. Just know that this book from beginning to end really does reflect the book of Ruth in the Bible, and I feel like she stuck to scripture really well. And the relationship between Ruth and Boaz in this one is so good, because if you know anything about the way that Boaz is or who Boaz is, he is a kinsman redeemer for Ruth's family. He is exactly the imagery of what Jesus is to us in our lives, and I love that. It is such a good and wholesome representation of biblical men and biblical relationships, and I highly recommend checking this one out. And then on the flip side of that, we have The Queen's Cook, which is the first book in Queen Esther's court series. Now, this is not following Queen Esther per se. She is mentioned throughout, but she is not the main character. The main character is actually not someone that we know from the Bible. This is just more of a biblical history around the book of Esther, and the main character is not someone that we know to be an actual person from the Bible. It's just someone that is a fictional character for the sake of the story. But this is so good. This book has so many layers. There is like recipes, there's mystery, there's romance, there's political intrigue, there's good, really great friendships. There's so many good things about this. And it follows our main character, Roxana, and she is on her way to becoming the Queen's cook. I'll just say that. She will be Queen Esther's cook, and along the way, she meets a man named Aiden, and they end up having a slow burn romance, and I love it so much. So if you are interested in biblical fiction, but also a really good biblical romance or really good representations of what biblical men and biblical relationships should look like, these are great. Now I'll talk to you about some historical romances within the Christian fiction genre. And the reason I had to make this like a section is because just honestly for this book alone, there are some more, but this is another of my favorite books of last year. I think it was my number 3. Last year was definitely my year of romance, but this is The Letter Tree by Rachel Fordham. This book, you guys, is the best depiction of a timeless romance I ever did see. It is the perfect combination of You've Got Mail and Romeo and Juliet. It follows Laura and Isaac. They are 2 childhood friends and star-crossed lovers that were torn apart by their family's feud. They have feuding or rival shoe companies, and they fall in love by way of letter writing. This takes place in 1920s Buffalo, New York, and one day Laura leaves a note in this little hole in the tree at the Buffalo Zoo. She means to come back and get it, but when she comes back, she finds another letter has replaced it instead. So she starts this correspondence with a guy that she doesn't realize is Isaac, her childhood friend. And this, again, is just the sweetest romance from there. I love Isaac. He is a great example of a wholesome, good man that is just got like integrity and great morals and all these things. Like, I just love him so much. He is one of my favorite men that I've read about. And also another thing about this, I did say it was historical. It's very light on the historical, but it does talk about some things from the 1920s outside of like Prohibition, which is what I feel like most people associate the 20s with. So I learned some new things that I thought was really interesting. So I appreciated that as well. And then as far as the faith content goes in this one, it is very subtle. There are not a lot of heavy mentions of faith. They do mention prayer and God, but it's not really heavy. So I do think anyone can read this one and enjoy it. And again, it is one of my all-time favorites. Another book by the same author is Beyond Ivy Walls. I haven't gotten to this one yet, but it's supposed to be reminiscent of Beauty and the Beast. It's set in Iowa in 1903, and it's about a recluse and young woman who discover that the scars of life are no match against an act of love. So it's a little bit of Grumpy Sunshine, and it follows Sadie and Otis, and Sadie ends up running away to hide at this duster factory, and Otis hires her to work there, but he has a condition for Sadie to not tell anybody that he's returned to town. He is a recluse because he's ashamed of these scars that he has on his face, and so that is where you get a little bit of the Beauty and the Beast reminiscence, I guess. But it sounds like a great story, and again, I really love this author's other book, so I'm really hoping I love this one too. I have 2 more historical Christian books. The first one, I do think this is more subtle on the faith content as well. I could be wrong, but I haven't read this one yet. This is called The British Booksellers by Christy Cambron. I adore historical fiction that has to do with books, especially when it's involving books bringing a community together in times of hardship like war. So this is inspired by real accounts of the Forgotten Blitz bombings, and it follows Charlotte and Amos. It is a second chance romance, and they have rival bookstores. And the last book that I have in this section is one that I do think has more heavy faith content, is When the Day Comes by Gabrielle Meyer. This is such a cool premise, you guys. I think if you are looking for maybe a cleaner version of Outlander, or if you like time travel, you should check this out, because this book is about a woman who lives 2 different lives. One of them is in 1774 colonial Williamsburg around the Revolution. And then the other life that she lives is in 1914 Gilded Age New York City, and this is set around the women's suffrage movement. So our main character does live both these lives. She will go to sleep in one life and wake up in the other one, and by the time she turns 21 years old, she is going to have to decide which life to continue, which I can only imagine is such a difficult decision, because I'm sure she has great relationships and friendships and family in both of these lives, so I can't imagine having to choose. But I love the concept. Every book in this series, this is called the Timeless series, every book in this series follows a different person, I think, in this family, or a different woman in this family who deals with this issue. It just sounds so good. I've heard nothing but good things about it, so I definitely need to try to get to this sooner rather than later. And lastly, we are going to wrap it up with 4 more Christian books, and again, these are going to be a little bit of, some of them will have subtle content, some of them will be a little bit more heavy, but the first one I want to talk about is another cowboy romance, and that is Truth is a Whisper by Mandy Blake. I do think this one has more heavy faith content. I have heard from some people that it can get a little cheesy, which makes me a little hesitant, but I guess I'll just have to see whenever I finally read it. So this follows Ava and Jameson. They fell in love as teens, but they were separated, and 6 years later they're reunited to save a ranch, I think. There is a hateful mom in this story, but I think that is offset by a really sweet grandfather. I do think this has some harder elements in it, and I do know that the guy is a Christian and she is not at the beginning, but she is becoming a believer. I'm really excited to read this one, and again, I just really need a cowboy romance in my life. Next up is a sports romance, and it's called Love and Other Goals by Tracy Back. This is set on a college campus. It involves soccer and it involves a college ministry. So this is going to have a little bit heavier of faith content as well. And this follows our main characters, Lena and Mateo. So Lena is an immigration lawyer. She has a plan. She's got all her ducks in a row, and Mateo comes out of left field and asks her to a coffee and kind of throws a wrench in her plans. That's all I know about it. That's all I need to know. I feel like this could be a book that really resonates with me because it's about some strong friendships. It's about a relationship where the guy is a soccer player and my husband was a soccer player. And also it involves college ministry, which I was involved pretty heavily in college ministry myself. So I have some really high hopes for this one. I also know this has love letters and great strong female friendships, which are all things that I tend to love in my books. Then we have Memory Lane by Becky Wade, and again, I have heard so many good things about this book. I don't know why it's taken me so long to read it, but it does deal with some heavier topics, so just know that. We'll talk about those in a second, and it has a more subtle faith content, so I don't think you're going to get as heavy as the previous two books I mentioned, but this follows Remy and Jonah, question mark. The reason I say question mark is because we don't know if that's his actual name. So Remy lives on this island off the coast of Maine. That's where the story is set. And one day she is out and she sees this guy floating or struggling, I think, in the water off the coast. She brings him in and saves him. And his name is Jonah for now because he does not remember who he was. He has amnesia and she is nursing him back to health. And I love that trope. I love the amnesia trope. I love not knowing. So I'm very excited to figure out who this guy is. And obviously there's going to be a romance that blooms from it. But like I mentioned before, there are some heavier topics in this one. I know there is trauma, there is SA and affairs and suicide. I don't know how heavy those go into or how detailed they are, but just be aware that those are in this book as well. And this is the first book in the Sons of Scandal romance series. So I think there are 2 other books in the series, but yeah, hopefully I'll enjoy this one enough to continue. And we are finally at the very end, and I have one more book to talk to you all about in the Christian romance section. And I have just come in and swooped to do this because I thought it was just clever of me. I started with my favorite romance author, and y'all are probably like, well, why didn't you just end with the best? I am. Because Courtney Walsh has a backlist. Her newer books are more rom-com-y, and her older books, she used to write Christian fiction or more like women's fiction contemporary romance. This is one that I have by her called Just Look Up. This is following Lane and Ryan, and Lane is a little bit of a workaholic. She's such a workaholic that even after her family has an emergency that sends her back home, she's still consumed with her work. She's constantly on her phone or on her laptop, and she does also struggle with some anxiety and body image issues, so she has quite a lot going on. She ends up running into Ryan, who is somebody that she knows from her childhood, and there is a little bit of a second chance romance that comes out of that. But this book is a little bit deeper, I think, in regard to some heavy topics versus her other books that don't have as many. I don't think that there's still super heavy topics, but it's definitely going to talk about some things. And this is a lot about family and forgiveness and restoration. And obviously, Just Look Up kind of has a dual meaning here because on the one hand, you're looking at the main girl and thinking you just need to look up from your phone, from your computer, from your work, and see the beauty of the life that's right in front of you and notice the people that you have in your corner. But also it's a nod to just looking up to God and all that he can offer you. So I'm very excited to check out Courtney's backlist, and so we had to again start and end with a favorite. Whew, okay, I think I have told you all about all the romance books that I could possibly think of, all the ones that I own, that I've read and loved, and that I'm so excited to read. And I truly hope that you have found some romance books that you are interested in today. It was just on my heart to share with you all some clean and closed door reads and some Christian reads because I do feel like these are some of the best romances out there, and I wanted to make sure that you knew about them. Again, don't forget to check out the content creators that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. They are linked down in the description box below. I will also have these books linked in the description if you want to check any of them out. But But I hope that you found some great books today, and if there are any clean, closed door, or Christian romances that you recommend that I did not talk about in today's video, please leave them down in the description below. I would love if we could just compile a master list for everybody who clicks on this video so everybody can find so many great books to check out. But if you have nothing else to say and you just want to leave a comment for support, I would love it if you leave a pink heart emoji down in the comments below. Happy Love Month, everybody. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for clicking on today's video and watching and spending this time with me. And I look forward to seeing you all in my next video. Bye, friends.